Did the hospital send the confirmation for my surgery? I asked quietly, trying to keep my voice steady as we sat around the polished oak table. My mom didn't even look up from serving mashed potatoes. They did, she said casually. But we had to use that money for your brother's birthday. He only turns 21 once, you know. My fork stopped midair. You used my surgery money? Dad chimed in, chuckling. You'll be fine, Evelyn. You always make such a big deal out of everything. Your brother barely gets any attention. Let him have his moment. Across the table, Ethan grinned smugly, flashing the new designer watch gleaming on his wrist. Thanks for funding my birthday, sis, he said, half joking but fully proud. The room went silent except for the faint clinking of cutlery. I placed my fork down carefully, my heart thudding like thunder under the calm surface of my voice. So, I said softly, I guess you still don't know who really needs the surgery. Dad frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Mom's smile faltered. Evelyn, stop being dramatic. I looked at each of them slowly, one by one. My brother's arrogant smirk, my father's dismissive eyes, my mother's cold indifference, and then I smiled. Don't worry, I said. You'll find out soon enough. For the first time in years, they looked uneasy. That night, as I packed a single suitcase, I decided they wouldn't get another chance to spend my life like it was disposable. And the real surgery? It wasn't for my body anymore, it was for my freedom. The next morning, I drove to the hospital myself, the same one my parents were supposed to handle everything with. The receptionist, a kind woman named Hannah, looked up my file. Your surgery was fully approved, Ms. Reeves, she said. But your guardian canceled it 2 weeks ago. Claimed it wasn't medically necessary. I froze. Guardian? I was 24. They didn't have that power anymore. Hannah frowned at her screen. Wait, someone submitted an old authorization form under your father's name. That's highly irregular. I exhaled slowly. Can I get a copy of that form? Within minutes, I was holding the evidence, my father's signature, forged beside mine. The ink was shaky, but not enough to draw suspicion. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady when I said, thank you. Outside in the parking lot, the sun felt different, not warm, but clarifying. I drove straight to my lawyer's office. Mr. Lane had handled my insurance paperwork before. When he saw the document, his expression darkened. This is fraud, Evelyn. Not just morally wrong, legally punishable. Good, I said quietly. Then we'll handle it legally. That evening, I emailed my parents the scanned copy of the forged signature, attaching the message. I think you should know what the hospital found today. I'll let you decide whether you want to fix it yourselves or let someone else fix it for you. By midnight, my phone buzzed nonstop. Missed calls. Apologies. Excuses. I didn't answer a single one. The real surgery was scheduled for next week, funded by a private foundation that didn't steal from me. And soon, I'd show my family what healing really looked like. A week after my surgery, I received a message in our family group chat, the same one they used to brag about Ethan's parties. Mom, Sunday dinner at 7. Family only. Let's talk. I stared at it for a long moment. Maybe they thought a single dinner could undo years of betrayal. Still, curiosity won. I showed up. The house was spotless, candles lit, like they were preparing for a guest who mattered. Dad smiled stiffly. Evelyn, you look good. Recovery suits you, Mom added, her voice too sweet to be real. Ethan, sitting across the table, avoided my eyes. Probably embarrassed. Probably still trying to figure out how I'd paid for everything on my own. Dinner started quiet, until Dad cleared his throat. Your mother and I made a mistake. We thought we were doing what was best for everyone. You used my medical fund for a birthday watch, I said calmly. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. Mom shifted uncomfortably. We were under pressure. Ethan needed validation. I interrupted. I hope that watch keeps his heart ticking, because mine almost didn't. Ethan looked up sharply. Eve, come on. I leaned back, folding my hands. I didn't come here for an apology. I came here to return something. I placed a sealed envelope on the table. Their eyes followed it nervously. What's that? Dad asked. The beginning of accountability, I said softly. They didn't know yet inside were legal notices, fraud investigation, forgery report, hospital correspondence, and a single note that read, "This is what healing costs when you try to steal it." 3 days later, I was sitting in my office, the same firm where I'd built my career in medical administration, when my assistant buzzed in. "Evelyn, your parents are here. They said it's urgent." I smiled faintly. Perfect timing. They entered, faces pale, eyes darting around the marble-floored room like they didn't belong there. "Eve," Dad began, "the hospital called. They said someone reported us for document tampering." "You wouldn't." I leaned back in my chair. "I didn't report you. The system did. The hospital's audit flagged the forgery automatically." Mom's voice cracked. "They said we could face charges." "How could you do this to your family?" "Family?" I repeated softly. "You used that word while spending my surgery fund on a watch. You risked my life for a party." Ethan muttered, "It was just money, Eve." I stood, sliding a stack of documents across the table, certified copies from the hospital, the insurance company, and my lawyer. "This is a record of everything you signed in my name. It's also what I sent to the board this morning. They'll decide whether you keep your positions in the hospital trust." Dad's face drained of color. "You wouldn't ruin your own family for this." I looked at him calmly. "You already did. I'm just finishing what you started." The door opened then. My company's legal counsel entered with a folder. "Ms. Reeves, the press statement's ready for your approval." My mother's lips parted in shock. "Press?" I smiled gently. "Transparency, Mom. You taught me to tell the truth, when it's convenient. I'm just doing it when it matters." 2 days later, the conference room was packed, journalists, hospital representatives, and investors. My parents sat stiffly in the second row, their expressions carved in panic. Ethan wasn't there. Apparently, he couldn't handle the stress. The microphones flashed as I stepped onto the podium. "Good morning. I'm Evelyn Reeves, Head of Operations for the Helios Medical Foundation. Today, I want to address a matter not of money, but of ethics." The cameras clicked. I could feel my parents' eyes burning into my back. "Last month," I continued, "someone canceled a life-saving surgery using falsified documents and redirected the patient's funds for personal use. That patient was me." A gasp rippled through the audience. I let the silence linger before continuing. "The hospital system's digital audit caught the forgery, proving that privilege without accountability breeds corruption, even within families." I paused, then turned slightly, meeting my father's eyes. "This isn't about vengeance. It's about the truth. Because silence only protects the guilty." The reporters exploded with questions. I answered calmly, naming no names, just showing the documents, the timeline, the signatures. The evidence spoke louder than accusation ever could. Afterward, as I stepped down, I caught my father's whisper to my mother. "She destroyed us." I turned back and said quietly, "No, Dad." I freed myself. The story went viral overnight. Commentators praised my composure, my courage. But I didn't care about headlines. I cared that, for once, the narrative belonged to me. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because the world now saw what kind of people they were and what kind of woman I had become. By Monday morning, the fallout had begun. The hospital board called an emergency session. My parents' names, once symbols of community respect, were now whispered with shame. News outlets replayed my statement, dissecting every sentence. Social media flooded with support. "Stay strong, Evelyn. She's what integrity looks like." But the part that hit hardest came from the hospital director himself. He called me into his office, eyes full of quiet admiration. "Evelyn," he said, "what you did took courage. We're launching a full ethics review, and we'd like you to lead it." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I'd spent years feeling invisible in my family's shadow, and now the very institution they'd used to control me was placing its trust in me. I accepted. That afternoon, I received a message from Ethan. "Ethan, Mom's crying nonstop. Dad won't leave his office. Are you happy now?" I stared at the screen before replying. "Me? I didn't do this to make them suffer. I did it so they'd finally understand suffering." He didn't respond. Later, I received a formal letter, my father's resignation from the board. The same man who once told me, "You're not strong enough for leadership," had been forced to step down under my signature. That night, I sat in my apartment, the same one they'd mocked as temporary. My surgical scar still ached faintly, a reminder of what almost didn't heal. Some wounds fade with time. Others, you learn to wear like armor. And mine? Mine gleamed, proof that betrayal doesn't break you. It builds the version of you they never thought you'd become. 2 weeks later, I got an unexpected call from my mother. Her voice was quiet, stripped of the usual authority. "Evelyn, can we have dinner?" "Just the family." I hesitated, but agreed. There was no anger left, just curiosity. The restaurant they chose was the same one where we'd celebrated my brother's every promotion. When I arrived, the air felt heavy. My father was already seated, staring into his untouched glass of water. My mother looked older, not physically, but in spirit. "Evelyn," she started softly, "we didn't realize how much we'd hurt you." I met her eyes. "You realized? You just didn't care until the world did." Dad flinched. "We were under pressure. I made bad choices." "No," I said calmly. "You made comfortable ones. At my expense." The waiter brought our food, but no one touched it. Silence filled the space between us, the kind that comes when truth replaces excuses. After a long pause, my father sighed. "We've lost everything, reputation, board seats, respect. But you gained all of it." I folded my hands. "I didn't want you to lose. I just wanted to stop losing myself." For the first time, my mother's eyes welled with tears. "You've become someone stronger than we ever imagined." I smiled faintly. "You mean stronger than you ever allowed me to be." The check arrived. My father reached for it, but I stopped him. "Don't worry. I've got it." It wasn't pride. It was closure. For years, they'd paid to control me. Tonight, I paid to end it. A month later, the hospital's annual gala was held, the same kind of glittering event my parents once ruled. This time, I stood at the podium, not as a patient or a daughter, but as the newly appointed director of medical ethics and patient advocacy. Flashbulbs popped. The same reporters who'd once chased my father now turned their cameras toward me. My speech was short, deliberate. "Integrity," I said, "isn't inherited. It's proven when doing the right thing costs you everything." Applause filled the hall. I caught sight of my parents near the back, standing, clapping slowly. My mother's eyes glistened with something between pride and regret. My father looked smaller, but finally human. After the event, I stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights reflected off the hospital windows like constellations, distant but clear. Julian, the hospital director who had believed in me from the start, joined me quietly. "You did it, Evelyn," he said softly. "You turned pain into purpose." I smiled faintly. It was never about revenge. It was about rewriting the ending. He nodded. "And you did, beautifully." Weeks later, I received a handwritten letter. It was from my father. No excuses this time, just 7 words. "You were always the strong one, Evelyn." I placed it in my desk drawer, beside my old surgical bracelet, the one that once labeled me dependent. Now, I was anything but, because sometimes poetic justice isn't loud. It's quiet. It's calm. It's a woman standing on her own 2 feet, while the world finally watches her rise. "Family dinner," I said. "Can't wait for the family reunion." My sister laughed. "You're not invited. It's for real family." Everyone laughed. I just smiled and left. My name is Sloan Mercer. I'm 31. And if you think you know how this ends, stay tuned. Do you know the exact moment love turns into currency? For me, it was the sound of my sister's laughter echoing across that dinner table, slicing through my ribs like glass. The irony? I'd paid for that meal. Every single one of them sitting there, my parents, my sister, her husband, had eaten on my dime. I covered rent when Dad lost his job, paid Mom's medical bills, even sent money for their anniversary trip to Nashville. But gratitude is temporary when entitlement's inherited. Growing up, I was the responsible one. The boring sister who worked 2 jobs while my sister, Paige, became the family's golden child. I thought adulthood would balance things out. Instead, it made the hierarchy official. Paige's mistakes were cute. Mine were embarrassing. That dinner was the first time I didn't try to fix it. I just smiled, paid the bill, and walked away without a word. 4 days later, Dad tried to pull $3,600 from our shared account, the one I'd opened for his medical emergencies, not family reunions. I stared at the notification and took a slow breath. Then I transferred every cent into a new account and sent a screenshot. Payment denied. Must be that family-only policy. No words, just silence after. 2 days later, I was curled up on my couch, laptop open, when I heard it, a loud, deliberate knock at my door. The kind that doesn't ask permission. The kind that means they came to collect. The knocking grew louder, heavy, impatient, almost rhythmic. For a second, I thought maybe it was a delivery. But then came her voice. "Sloan, open up." It was Paige. I froze, phone still in my hand. The same sister who'd laughed in my face 2 nights earlier now sounded like she was rehearsing outrage. I opened the door just enough to see her. Designer bag, smudged lipstick, eyes sharp with fake tears. "Dad's furious," she said, stepping inside without being invited. "You embarrassed him. He couldn't even pay for his medication because you froze the account." I blinked. He was trying to pull out $3,600 for a caterer, Paige. She rolled her eyes. "It's all family money. Why are you acting like you're above everyone?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Because I earned it. Every dollar. You just collect it." Her lips curled. "You always think you're better, don't you? The saint who sacrifices for everyone." She laughed, bitter. "Newsflash, Sloan. No one needs your martyr act anymore." Something inside me snapped, but not the way it used to. I didn't yell. I didn't defend myself. I just walked to my kitchen counter, grabbed a small folder, and handed it to her. "What's this?" she said, flipping through. "Receipts," I said. "The Nashville trip? Paid by me. Dad's surgery? Paid by me. Your husband's startup loan? Paid by me. And that family reunion you were mocking me about? I paid the deposit on the venue 6 months ago. But don't worry, I canceled it this morning." Her face fell. "You didn't?" "Oh, I did. Guess you'll have to find a new sponsor for your real family." Paige's voice trembled. "You're cruel." "No," I said quietly. "I'm finally done paying for love that never existed." She stood frozen, speechless for once. Then she turned and stormed out. But something told me this wasn't over, because Paige never fought alone. I didn't hear from Paige for 24 hours. That should have been a relief. Instead, it was the kind of silence that buzzed, like the air before a storm. The next afternoon, while I was finishing client reports, my phone started blowing up. Unknown numbers, private calls, messages flooding in. "Sloan, what's wrong with Dad? He says you stole from him. Why would you take all his money?" I opened social media and felt my stomach twist. Paige had posted a long, carefully written paragraph under an old family photo, us at the beach, all fake smiles. It breaks my heart to see my sister do this. Family helps family, but I guess some people change when money does. Please keep Dad in your prayers. 200 comments. Sympathy. Outrage. My name wasn't tagged, but it didn't have to be. Everyone knew. Eli, my fiancé, called immediately. "Don't respond," he said. "They want attention. They'll burn themselves out. But that's the thing about liars. They don't run out of fuel when people keep feeding them." By evening, Mom texted me. "You've gone too far this time." Dad's blood pressure spiked. "If anything happens, it's on you." I sat on the edge of my bed, shaking. The irony? I was the one who paid for his medicine last month. I pulled up my online banking again. The family account balance still sat at $0. I'd left it that way intentionally, a mirror for what I felt. The next morning, there was another knock. Softer this time. I opened the door to find Dad. Pale. Older. Quieter than I remembered. He didn't shout. Didn't accuse. He just looked at me and said, "You didn't have to humiliate us." "Dad," I whispered, "you did that yourselves." But when he turned to leave, I saw something in his eyes. Fear. Not of me. Of what Paige had done that I hadn't discovered yet. And I had a feeling that whatever it was, it involved more than money. Dad's visit stayed with me long after the door closed. The way his shoulders hunched, the tremor in his voice, it didn't feel like anger anymore. It felt like shame, but not his own. That night, I logged into my old shared financial dashboard, the one I'd used to manage Dad's bills. The access was still active. I shouldn't have looked, but something inside me said check. When the screen loaded, my hands went cold. Multiple withdrawals. All small, $200, $300, $450, recurring every week for the past 6 months. Each labeled under a name I didn't recognize. P. Designs Consulting. I clicked the details. The linked account belonged to Paige. I felt my jaw tighten. While they mocked me for being the stingy sister, she'd been quietly siphoning money from our father's medical fund, using it for her so-called interior design business. I opened my emails, searching through Dad's old payment alerts. There it was, a message forwarded weeks ago to my sister's address. She'd been using his login credentials. My login credentials. I didn't know whether to scream or laugh. Instead, I printed every record, labeled each transaction, and slipped them into a brown envelope. The truth always looks heavier on paper. The next morning, I called Dad. "I need you to see something," I said. He hesitated. "Is this about the money?" "It's about the person you think is saving you," I said quietly. He came by that afternoon. When he sat down, I slid the folder across the table. His fingers shook as he flipped through the pages. With every line he read, his breathing changed. When he finally looked up, his voice was small. "She took this much from me?" "Yes," I said softly. "And blamed me to keep you looking the other way." He stared at the floor, eyes clouded with realization. "I let her turn me against you." I nodded. "You didn't let her, Dad. You trusted her." "I did too." He whispered, almost to himself. "What are you going to do now?" I looked at the envelope still open between us and said, "Something I should have done years ago." I didn't sleep that night. The sound of Dad's voice, broken, bewildered, kept replaying in my head. Part of me wanted to call Paige and unleash everything I'd kept buried for years. But the calmer part, the woman who had stopped begging for love, knew shouting wouldn't fix what deceit had already hollowed out. Instead, I opened my laptop and started building a file. Every screenshot, transaction, date, and message went into labeled folders. Proof. At 8 a.m., I called Grace Collins, my lawyer, the same woman who'd helped me separate my business from the family years ago. She listened without interrupting, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. "You ready to make this official?" "Yes," I said. "But I don't want revenge. I want accountability." By noon, Grace drafted a fraud affidavit and sent copies of the records to my father's email. He'd need to confirm the losses. It was his account, after all. When he called an hour later, his voice was shaking. "I signed it," he said. "I can't believe it, Sloan. My own daughter." I didn't say me too. Some truths are too sharp to repeat. 2 days later, Paige showed up again. No warning, just pounding on the door like before. This time, I didn't answer. Through the glass, she shouted, "You think you're smart, huh? You turned Dad against me." Her words cracked, and for a second, I saw the little girl who used to steal my crayons and hide behind Mom's legs. But then she hissed, "You'll regret this," and the illusion shattered. That night, I forwarded the entire case file to the local authorities. Grace assured me they'd contact her soon, and that my involvement would stay minimal. Before bed, I walked to the mirror, staring at my reflection. For years, I'd imagined justice would feel loud, cinematic. But it didn't. It felt quiet, steady. I whispered to my reflection, "Let the truth do the talking now." And for the first time, I didn't flinch at my own eyes. The call came 3 days later. Grace's tone was calm, but beneath it, I could hear the spark of something final. They've confirmed the fraud, Sloan. The investigation's moving forward. Your father's statement sealed it. I sat there in silence, holding my mug of coffee like it might float away. What happens now? I asked. She'll be contacted by the Financial Crimes Division, Grace replied. You don't have to do anything. Just live your life. Live my life. It sounded simple, but I'd spent years surviving, not living. Later that day, my father called again. His voice was low, weighed down by guilt. I don't know how to face her, he said. You don't have to, I replied. She made her choices. He sighed. You sound like your mother. That caught me off guard. Mom had passed 5 years earlier, her absence another wound that time never truly dressed. She always wanted us to stay close, he said softly. Then she should have taught us how, I whispered. That night, as the sun dropped behind Portland's skyline, I sat on my balcony. The city lights shimmered like tiny promises, imperfect, distant, but still there. My phone buzzed once more, an unknown number. I ignored it. Then came a text. You destroyed everything. Hope you're proud. Paige. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Silence was stronger. Hours later, I opened my email and saw a message from the police liaison, confirming they'd contacted Paige. No drama. No spectacle. Just a system doing what truth demanded. I forwarded it to Grace, and then closed my laptop. Eli came outside, draping a blanket over my shoulders. How's your heart? He asked quietly. Unlearning old loyalties, I said. He smiled faintly. Painful lesson? I nodded. Necessary one. Below us, the city pulsed, alive, unaware of the quiet victories unfolding in small apartments like mine. And in that moment I realized justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered, you were right to walk away. A week later, the noise was gone. No calls. No messages. Just the hum of my apartment and the low thrum of Portland rain against the windows. The silence felt strange at first, too calm, too still, but slowly it started to feel like oxygen. Dad stopped by one evening, holding a grocery bag instead of his usual excuses. He looked older, smaller somehow, but also lighter. I brought dinner, he said, smiling weakly. He'd made spaghetti, my favorite when I was little. We ate quietly for a while before he said, the detective came by today. Paige admitted to taking the money. My fork paused midair. She confessed. He nodded. She tried to say you framed her at first, but when they showed her the paper trail, she broke down. A dull ache spread through my chest. Not victory, not satisfaction. Just grief for the family that could have been. Dad reached for my hand. You know, I didn't realize how much you've carried. I let her paint you as selfish. You were the only one holding us together. I swallowed hard. I just wanted to be part of the family, Dad. That's all I ever wanted. He exhaled slowly. I know. And I'm sorry you had to buy your way into love that should have been free. For a moment, we just sat there, two people trying to rebuild something fragile. The rain softened outside, and I realized that even if forgiveness wasn't complete, it had started. When Dad left, I stood at the window, watching his car fade into the night. My reflection looked unfamiliar, calmer, grounded. That's when my phone buzzed again, an email from Grace. Paige accepted a plea agreement. No trial. Restitution to your father. Case closed. 2 words stood out. Case closed. But for me, it wasn't closure yet. There was one last thing left to do, something not for justice, not for revenge, but for peace. Because sometimes, the only way to end a legacy of debt is to forgive it completely. 2 months later, the world had settled into a new rhythm. The investigation was over. Dad had moved to a smaller apartment near the coast, and I'd finally stopped checking my phone expecting chaos. Peace, I learned, doesn't arrive like a sunrise. It creeps in quietly until you realize you're not flinching anymore. That morning, I wrote a letter. No anger. No defense. Just truth. Paige. I'm not writing to reopen wounds. I'm writing to close mine. You took money that wasn't yours, but what hurt most wasn't the theft. It was how easily you made me your villain. I'm not sending this to punish you. I'm sending it to release both of us. I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means I won't carry this anymore.
Sloane.
I sealed it and mailed it to her last known address. Not because she deserved it, but because I did. Later that evening, Dad called from the coast. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," I said. And for once, I wasn't lying. He chuckled softly. "You always were the strong one." "No," I replied. "I just learned how to stop apologizing for being strong." After we hung up, I sat by my window, watching the rain start again, soft, unhurried, familiar. My mind wandered back to that night at the family dinner table, their laughter echoing in my chest. I remembered how small I felt walking away, how lonely. But that version of me, the one who stayed quiet to keep peace, didn't exist anymore. Now, the silence wasn't loneliness. It was ownership. I checked my banking app out of habit. Balance stable, everything exactly where it should be. For the first time in years, no one else's name appeared on the account. I smiled, closed the laptop, and whispered to the room, "Guess I finally made it into the real family. Just me." Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, and let the rain play my victory song. This time it wasn't about revenge. It was about finally keeping what was mine, peace.
The envelope was heavy, the kind made to impress. Gold embossed with a wax seal as if a royal decree had been issued. I almost laughed. Of course, Lawton's engagement dinner would be announced like a coronation. I held it for a few seconds before opening it. Part of me already knew what it would say. Inside on cream cardstock, the script read, "You are cordially invited to celebrate the engagement of Lawton Maddox and Cecily Prescott." The location was printed in smaller font, but it might as well have screamed. The Bellwether, my restaurant. For a long moment, I just stared at it. The irony had claws. 5 years of silence. 5 years of vague holiday cards and clipped birthday texts. And now, out of all the fine dining venues in Charleston, my family had chosen mine, unaware I had built it from the ground up. The easiest choice would have been to ignore the invitation, toss it into the trash, like they had done with my dreams. But something in me paused. I thought of the girl I was the day I walked out of their world, 25, tired of pretending, carrying nothing but a small suitcase, and a voice no one wanted to hear. They had called me reckless, ungrateful. My mother, Blythe, had clutched her pearls like I had suggested robbing a bank instead of attending culinary school. My father said nothing at all. Just poured another drink. Lawton didn't look up from his phone. Now they were dining under my roof, sipping from stemware I had selected soon to taste food born from hands they said weren't made for work. I ran my fingers over the invitation one last time, then set it down beside my knife roll. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about pride. It was about presence. I had earned the right to be in that room, whether they knew it or not. I reached into my closet and pulled out the black dress. Simple, sharp. The one that said, "I'm not here to impress you. I'm here because I no longer need to." The fabric felt steady against my skin as I zipped it up. The mirror showed a woman they wouldn't recognize, and that was the point. I stepped out the door and headed toward the Bellwether. Savannah never let you forget who you were supposed to be. In our neighborhood, heritage mattered more than heart. Lawn parties were battlegrounds in silk and seersucker, and my parents, Kenneth and Blythe Maddox, wore their lineage like armor. Our family crest hung in the foyer like a warning legacy, first feelings later. Lawton played the role perfectly. He was born with the Maddox jawline, the politician's handshake, and a resume tailored for Ivy League brochures. Marin, always a step behind him, but just as polished, mastered the performance of charm and thinly veiled cruelty by 13. They moved through the world like they owned it, and in Savannah that was almost true. I never quite figured out where I fit in. I wasn't rebellious, not in the screaming, slamming doors kind of way. I just drifted toward the kitchen when no one was looking. Inez ran it like a cathedral, quiet, reverent, everything in its place. She wasn't family by blood, but in that house she was the only one who ever really saw me. When I was 10, she let me dice onions beside her. I cried through every cut, but Inez never told me to stop. "You got steady hands, baby," she said. "The kind that make people feel safe when you cook." I started sneaking cookbooks under my pillow, watching reruns of old culinary competitions like bedtime stories. My mother found me piping choux pastry at midnight once. She didn't ask how I learned. She just said Mitchell's hire chefs. They don't become them. By the time I was 21, I knew I had to go. The weight of their expectations was smothering every part of me that felt alive. I packed a duffel bag, withdrew the last $2,000 from my college account, and left a note on the mahogany desk in my father's study. It said simply, "I love you, but I can't be this version of me anymore." They didn't chase me. Not once. 5 years later, I stood outside the bellwether with steady hands and a full heart. My name wasn't on the awning, but my fingerprints were on every inch of this place. I stepped inside and let the familiar scent of seared rosemary and brown butter guide me toward the table where the Maddoxes were already seated. The maitre d' greeted me with a subtle nod, a signal of quiet recognition. He said nothing else, just gestured toward the main dining room with the same professional grace he extended to every guest. It was exactly what I needed. Tonight I wasn't Chef Maddox. I was Elira, the middle child, with nothing to prove and no one left to impress. They had, of course, claimed the best table center of the room under the hand-blown glass chandelier I'd commissioned from a local artisan. Maren sat with her back straight and her earrings louder than her voice. Lawton looked up briefly from his phone, then returned to scrolling. My parents were already mid-conversation, likely about country club renovations or someone's unfortunate second divorce. "Elira," my mother said, rising halfway from her seat with a practiced air kiss. "You made it." "Would have been a shame to miss your first engagement dinner," I replied, taking the only open chair. Second, technically, Maren chimed in with a too-sweet smile. "But who's counting?" My father poured me a glass of wine without asking. A Cabernet, not what paired with the opening course, but I said nothing. Maren's eyes flicked over my dress. "You look comfortable." "She's always had a more minimalist style," my mother said, folding her napkin. "Even as a child." "You remember that awful corduroy phase?" They laughed politely as if I weren't sitting right there. Celeste, one of our most experienced servers, approached the table with the amuse-bouche. Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second before she placed the delicate bite in front of each guest compressed watermelon fermented black garlic, a single microgreen. Not one of them knew it had taken me 3 months to perfect that bite. "Well, this is precious," my father muttered. "It's called an amuse-bouche," I offered. "I know what it's called," Maren snapped. "I just didn't expect something so conceptual. You know, Elira, you've always had that artsy streak. Never quite practical. And still unmarried," my mother added lightly, as if it were an observation rather than a verdict. Lawton stayed quiet, but his fiancée Cecily gave me a small smile. Pity or politeness, I couldn't tell. As the next course was cleared, Jose passed behind me with the wine pairings. He didn't say a word, but the way he lifted the bottle, our reserve Chardonnay, was his own quiet salute. I kept my eyes on the table hands, steady on the linen, while they picked apart my life bite by bite without ever tasting the truth. I used to come home so exhausted my arms would shake, unlocking the door. Back then, home was a basement room in a crumbling shotgun house I shared with 3 other women and more roaches than people. The walls sweated in summer, froze in winter, and the stove clicked ominously even when it was off. But it had a lock and a window that caught the morning light. I called that luxury. In those first years, I worked anywhere that would take me. A prep cook at a bistro from 5 to noon. A line cook in Midtown from 1 to 10. Weekends at a bakery where I burned the same patch of my wrist so many times the skin stopped scarring. I kept notebooks in my apron pocket, filling them with sauce ratios, spice combinations, things I overheard chefs mutter under their breath but never explained. Chef Yvette Léon changed everything. She hired me as a kitchen assistant at one of her pop-up tastings in New Orleans. I thought she'd forget me. Instead, she sent for me 3 weeks later. "Your knife work is sloppy," she said by way of welcome. "But your instincts, I'd like to see if they can be sharpened." I worked for her for nearly 2 years. She taught me discipline without cruelty, elegance without ego. "We don't chase applause," she'd say. "We create silence." When guests paused between bites that held breath, that reverence that was the applause that mattered. It was at one of her charity events that I met James Warren. He tried my spring pea risotto and asked who made it. I thought he was just another guest fishing for compliments. Turned out he was a venture capitalist with a soft spot for food that made him feel something. "You ever think of running your own place?" he asked. "Every day." He smiled. "Then stop waiting for permission." 6 months later, the Bellwether opened its doors in Charleston's historic quarter. The space had been a failed jazz bar before I gutted it. I chose the tiles, the linen weight, the curve of every chair, and I kept my name off every article, every profile. Not out of shame, but because I wanted the food to speak first. Now I watched Mar and prod at the next course hand-rolled pasta with pancetta and mint, and sigh dramatically. "This is it?" she asked, poking it like it had wronged her. My father squinted at the wine list. "Not a vintage I recognize," he murmured, as if disapproval lent him authority. I said nothing. Not yet. My silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was observation. Let them reveal themselves, I thought, before I show them what I've become. Marin's voice cut back in as she reached for her glass, already bored. "Honestly, Elira, I don't know how you eat at places like this on a cook's salary." The third course had just been cleared when Marin leaned forward, chin resting delicately on the back of her manicured hand, and said it. "Be honest, Elira, can you even afford this place?" It landed softly like so many of her cuts did, but the sting was immediate. I glanced across the table. My mother pretended to adjust her napkin. My father sipped his wine like it was none of his concern. Lawton said nothing. Cecily looked vaguely horrified, which meant she still had some softness left in her. "I manage," I said evenly. Bradley smirked. "So what's the secret, living off credit cards? Or are you dating someone with deep pockets?" I stared at him, then took a slow sip of water. "I'm not dating anyone." He raised an eyebrow. "Then how exactly do you swing a meal like this? It's not exactly Olive Garden." The air thickened. Even Celeste paused as she passed, catching just enough to stiffen before moving on. I looked to Marcus, standing discreetly near the service station. Our eyes met for the briefest second. Not yet, I thought. "Let them keep going." "I mean, it's fine," Marin added, lifting her wine glass. "We can split your portion if that makes things easier. It wouldn't be the first time we've had to rescue you." Rescue me. That was rich. From What a Life I Actually Wanted, Bradley pulled out his wallet as Marcus approached with the black leather folder. "Please," he said with a self-satisfied smile. "Let me get this one. Consider it my gift to the family." My father did the expected performance hands, half raised a forced, "No, I couldn't possibly," as he leaned back in his chair. Bradley opened the check and paused. I watched the color in his face shift from smug to confused. "Wait, this can't be right," he muttered. "What is it?" Lawton asked. "There's only wine on this bill. No food." That's got to be an error. Marcus stepped forward, calm and precise. "Is there a problem, sir?" "Yes," Bradley said, tapping the paper. "You didn't charge us for the meal." Marcus looked to me. I gave a quiet nod. "There's no error," he said, turning back to Bradley. "The food portion was taken care of by Chef Maddox. For a moment, it didn't register. Then my father blinked. Chef Maddox. Marcus smiled faintly and turned to me. "Your usual table is prepared for your investor meeting, Chef. Would you like me to escort them when you're ready?" Silence spread over the table like smoke. I set down my glass and looked around at them, all of them finally meeting their eyes. "Yes," I said calmly. "Please close out the beverage tab. The rest is on the house." No one spoke. Not right away. Marin stared at me as if I'd just switched languages mid-sentence. Lawton looked between Marcus and me like he'd missed an important cue. My father sat frozen wine glass halfway to his mouth, and my mother's hand went instinctively to her necklace fingers, gripping the pearls she wore like a lifeline. "You own this place?" she asked, voice tight. "Yes," I said simply. "I'm the executive chef and sole proprietor of the Bellwether." "But it's been featured in Bon Appetit," my father said slowly. "And the Times." I nodded. "Last year. 4 stars." "You work here?" Lawton clarified as if that somehow softened the blow. I built it. They didn't know what to do with that. My mother blinked fast, pulling her expression into something that vaguely resembled pride. Well, she said, if you'd told us earlier, we could have celebrated this. We always believed you had potential. I smiled without warmth. No, you believed in control. You believed in image. You believed in what made sense to you. But you didn't believe in me, not when I needed it. Cecily had the grace to lower her eyes. Lawton shifted uncomfortably. I left because I couldn't keep shrinking into a version of myself that fit your world, I continued. And I stayed quiet because I needed to see what kind of people you really were when I wasn't performing for you. Marin scoffed. So this was some kind of test A-trap to humiliate us. No, I said. It was a mirror. Her face flushed. That's manipulative. I looked at her not with anger, but with something closer to pity. I needed to know how you'd treat me if you thought I had nothing. And now I do. A memory flashed Chef Yvette pressing a sticky note into my palm with the name of her butcher. The good ones don't just teach you how to cut, they teach you when to walk away. Another James Warren shaking my hand outside a converted jazz bar, his voice low. Make it yours. Every inch. And the first article, a photo of my hand holding a plated fig tart. No face, just the caption, a new voice in Southern cuisine doesn't speak. She listens with flavor. There were dozens more. My first mentorship program for young chefs. The cookbook I was nearly done writing. The early sketches of a second location I hadn't told anyone about yet. All of it mine. But why keep it from us? My mother asked again, her voice slipping into that soft, sweet Southern tone she used in interviews and family crises. We're your family. I exhaled. You're right. You are. And if you'd shown me an ounce of respect when you thought I was struggling this night would have looked very different. Marcus returned quietly, setting a small note in front of me, a reminder that the investors had arrived early. I folded it once, then stood from my chair. Excuse me, I have a business to run. They didn't leave all at once. The table lingered in awkward silence until someone, my mother, I think, reached for her clutch and said too brightly, Well, this has been quite a surprise. Lawton stood and cleared his throat. Elira, he said quietly, for what it's worth, this place. It's incredible. I'm sorry I didn't say that sooner. His voice didn't waver, and for the first time all night he looked at me without calculation. Thank you, I said. And I meant it. My mother stepped forward next, her tone shifting into performance again. We should do brunch, something casual, just to the family. Catch up properly now that everything's out in the open. I raised an eyebrow. Brunch at the club, maybe, she offered. Or wherever you prefer, of course. Cecily gave me a soft smile. I'd like that honestly. Then Bradley cleared his throat, clearly eager to reclaim some kind of authority. Look, I may have come off a little strong earlier, he began. But this place, what you've built, it's the real deal. And if you ever consider expansion, I know people. We could talk capital franchising models. This restaurant, I interrupted, is not your social ladder. He blinked. My mother pressed her lips together. No one argued. I let the silence stretch just long enough to sink in before adding, But I'd be happy to host the rehearsal dinner. As my gift. Marin, who had said nothing since the reveal, looked up with surprise. You'd do that? You're still my sister, I said. And this place means something to me. If I offer it, it's on my terms, not because I'm trying to win anyone over. She gave a small nod. Thank you. The staff had already begun to reset the dining room as they filed out their good nights polite, but hurried. As the door closed behind the last of them, I slipped into the back office and pulled out my journal, the one I'd been using for my cookbook draft. Food has always been the only language I trusted I wrote, not for approval, but for clarity, for truth. For home when home wasn't safe. The pen moved more easily now. The words didn't ache like they used to. They tasted clean. They felt mine. I closed the notebook just as Miranda knocked gently on the door. 2 weeks later, I met them for brunch. Not at the club, not at some polished bistro with white tablecloths and bottomless mimosas, but at Alma's, a chef-owned spot tucked between a laundromat and a tattoo parlor where the coffee was strong and the biscuits could make you cry. We sat on mismatched chairs around a table that wobbled slightly, sunlight slanting through chipped blinds. My mother wrinkled her nose at first, but then she took a bite of the sweet potato hash and didn't say another word. Lawton asked about my cookbook. Cecily asked to pre-order. Marin, surprisingly, just listened. It wasn't perfect, but it was quieter, easier. They weren't trying to fix me, and I wasn't performing. For the first time in years, it felt less like a test. That afternoon, I returned to the Bellwether and met with the mentorship group. 8 young chefs in training, wide-eyed and stubborn, reminded me of myself before the bruises and burns. We filleted fish-tasted sauces, discussed salt the way others discussed poetry. Zoe, one of the youngest, nailed a hollandaise on her first try. When I told her that, her face lit up like someone had handed her the keys to her future. Maybe in a way I had. Later that night, I found a text from Marin. Need advice. No BS. What would you do if the caterer for your bridal shower backed out the night before I smiled and typed back, "Call your sister"? She knows someone. Then I opened my notebook to the final page of the manuscript. The last line had been eluding me for weeks, but now it came without force. These aren't just recipes. They are proof you can feed yourself with dignity when the world starves you of it. I closed the journal, walked through the restaurant one last time, and turned off the lights. The room settled into stillness behind me, full of everything I'd built on my own terms in my own time. And for the first time in a long while, I walked home with nothing left to prove.